So I needed to make a desk, and it needs to sit in the lounge, so it needs to look pretty nice. So this is what I came up with. So this whole desk revolves around this curly walnut veneer, which I have, and I bought it for a project and decided not to use it, so I've been wanting to use it. I figured, why not make that the face of my desk? So the whole design really revolved around the idea of using these huge veneer sheets up and me being able to stare at them all the time, which I thought would be nice. So this whole job really is an experiment. It's a kind of a proof of concept, I suppose. It's a prototype. So there's lots of issues. This job, I run into a whole lot of problems, and I'm just thankful that it's finished. So I managed to score 3 sheets of oak veneered plywood from a local workshop who didn't want it, so I took it. Unfortunately, it's 3 different thicknesses, so it made life a little bit difficult as well. But the whole carcass is made from this stuff. So I'm going to edge the edges with this 2mm thick walnut veneer. So really the only way to apply this is with the heat gun from the bottom, because it's so thick. And to trim off the edges, I kind of made this little rig up a while ago, and it works, but actually it's not that great, and I found the hand plane much better. And for edging the inside faces of the ply, I decided to use this white gloss 1mm thick PVC edging, and it has a blue masking tape on it, if you're wondering. I could rebate the back of the side panels to take the 6mm back panel. And so taking the clamps off the next day, everything looked really nice. Of course, I know now that I've already made a mistake on this job, so that will annoy me later on. Anyhow, I got on with putting the couple of center dividers in. Then I could make up a very basic plinth, just a few pieces of plywood screwed together. And I mitered and screwed on the face panels from the back. And that can just be screwed on with a few angle brackets. And I could clear coat all of the main body, which is just a water-based polyurethane. And the backing panel, which is a sheet of 6mm mixed hardwood ply. So it's quite dark. It ends up being similar shade to walnut when it's in the shadows of the back of the desk. Then I could take the masking off the edging to reveal the glossy white. I actually quite like the timber and the white look, so each to their own. Next thing was to cut up the main panel to make the face doors. This took a lot of thinking and carrying on. I needed to drill these holes before I veneered the other side, just in case I ended up going through. You can see how close to the other side I wanted to get. and that was because I was pushing these hinges to the limit, or so I thought. The next problem was that these hinges need a 26mm hole, which is a ridiculous size, so I only had a 25mm drill bit, so then I had to route out freehand an extra 1/2 mil to make that little hinge fit. And then I also needed another 2mm down, so I had to rebate in the hinge flange into the door as well to try and make things work. So my next big smart idea was that I would use gas stays to hold the desk flap up, and I'd done some testing, so I was screwing these in what I thought was the correct place. It's not gonna work. Ah, man, it's not gonna work.
Unless you 45 that, and then end up with a fan of 45 up that way.
So because the edges of the door are mited, those hinges would not work, of course. I just didn't think about it. So what I ended up doing was using these are actually Blum lift up stays, and I've put them in upside down, so they are effectively lifting down. The reason these work is because they push out away from the cabinet and then they move up or down. So they actually travel 19mm and then pivot, so they get away from that mited corner. Yeah, okay, so I need to
5 mil.
yeah, it's about 5mm. And for whatever reason, these mounting plates for these hinges were just a nightmare to install, and I had to keep making these small adjustments to where they were screwed on. But I got there in the end. The next problem was making these gas stays work, and you can see that where the hinge mounts the door and the gas stay meets the door is the same place, and that's just not going to really work. So we stuffed around for ages trying to work out another system where we could make our own kind of interesting stay. Because of the way that the hinge that I'm using works, because it lifts out and then pivots, finding a stay solution where the pivot point would work properly was very difficult. That's why I ended up abandoning completely any kind of stay. And so I ended up deciding just to go old school and have the doors below hold up the desk when I need to. I could fill up all my mistakes with not so obvious black bog and start sorting out the veneers, which I was looking forward to quite a lot. Because the veneers still had the shape of the log which they were sliced from, I thought it would be interesting to kind of make a shape of a forest and keep the natural shape of the veneers instead of losing a lot of the width by straightening them up. And so I came up with this pattern which I really liked. So firstly just taped all the pieces together in their approximate location, well, final location really, and I could cut all the waste off from the top, which I don't need. If anybody out there knows a good way to do this, please let me know, but this was about the best thing I could come up with. It was just a sharp blade and follow the contours kind of freehand, and I would cut through both veneers at the same time, or any overlapping veneers. I would cut through all of them. And it was a bit nerve-wracking because the grain is obviously going every which way, but actually the results came out pretty good. And yeah, this took quite a while. So once I'd kind of jointed the pieces, I could stitch them together with tape. Then I was ready to start cutting up the panel. So I've always found that just using a sharp blade for cutting pieces like this to size is the best and certainly most quick way to cut veneers. I have a veneer saw, and you'll see I use it a bit later on just to test really, and the knife is way quicker. So with everything ready, I turned over my veneers. I'm using my torsion box assembly table as one side of my press, and I'll be clamping everything else down from the top. And yes, I really should invest in a vacuum bag system. I don't have one, so this is what I used. And I managed to just about put the wrong piece on the wrong side, but we sorted that out. Now I left it all clamped up for just over 2 hours, which is pretty standard for me, and everything was looking pretty good. But about a minute after I turned over these panels, got some really bad wrinkling happening in the veneers, which I think the problem was that I used slightly too much glue. I'm not entirely sure, because the wrinkles are actually very hard. They wouldn't just flatten out. So I'm not entirely sure what's going on there. Now this is me using a veneer saw very badly, perhaps. I'm not sure. Just does not really seem to cut very well. So I ran over the panels with 400 grit, and you can see in this shot particularly the kind of ripples I was talking about. It really is a shame. I'm pretty annoyed that it happened. But like I say, they're really hard, and they certainly don't press down, and not entirely sure what happened there. Anyway, I powered on so I could edge those pieces for the doors and flat. So with the desk flap fitted, I could cut the panel into 2 doors for the bottom. Now these hinges are called zero protrusion hinges by Bloom, and they're the only ones that will really work on a mitered edge. With these hinges you need to use a 9mm mount instead of a standard 0mm. Next problem here was somehow I trimmed about 2mm too much off the width of the doors, so there's the gap in the middle has ended up being about 4mm, which is really not acceptable on a client job, but I'll have to put up with it for myself. And then to confuse myself with the instructions for the bifold lift up door at the top. This was the first time I've used this particular hardware, and sure is a bit of a complicated thing. When you buy this particular hardware system, you get a pack of hinges which are meant to be for everything you need, so you don't really have a choice on this different styles. So I don't like these kind of expansion hinges, but that's what I got. And this is a special hinge that goes on the bifold part of the door. It has a really interesting range of motion. So yeah, turns out that those hinges weren't right, even after talking to the rep about it. So I ended up stealing a couple of hinges from one of the doors, and they worked fine. So then I could order a couple of extra hinges for the doors. So after a particularly long day with bad hinges and all sorts, I thought I'd cheer myself up by at least putting a sealer coat on the burl, or the curly walnut. So yeah, I thought that started to look really nice. So next mistake is that the hinges for the bifold system are right where my shelf is inside the unit. So you can see I've had to cut out notches everywhere for the hinges and the lift up arms to go when the door's shut. But it works, so that's good. So out comes the old plywood kind of whatever desk. And I screwed it into one of the studs through a steel bracket, so it's not going anywhere. And then I can finally put it back together. So, it's certainly not the best thing I've ever built, but I do enjoy looking at the awesome veneer, and I certainly do enjoy using it. It works really nice. I like the size of the desk flap. So anyway, hopefully someone out there learnt from some of my mistakes. Thanks for watching, everyone.